Hello, and welcome to Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Put your crash helmets on and put your seatbelts on. Get you a stiff drink or a strong cup of coffee, maybe a Xanax, because you're about to get a little bit of an old lady lecture. First off, I personally know some of the people in this nationally breaking story, a story that is all over social media, the news, and their lives are about to get very interesting. And I love that for them. This is a huge news story for the country, but here in Southern Utah, it is massive. The lecture that I know you're all just so looking forward to is because this story has to do with politics. I abhor politics, you know this, but I'm going to talk about this story. If you're a little snowflake who throws a toddler tantrum when you don't get your way, I would highly suggest you do not watch this video. If you're someone who cannot handle the fact that many people in this country don't think the way you do, I would highly suggest you find another YouTube channel altogether because I'm not the one. I do not associate with the far right or with the far left. They're both wings of the same bird. But only one of those sides has tried to overthrow the peaceful transition of power. Facts. We do facts here, and only because this story is so fascinating have I decided to cover it. I do not watch the news, I do not get my news from mainstream media, and I deal only in facts when I am reporting to you history, dates, times, and truthful information. That said, this is my channel, and most of you are here because, as your continuous feedback confirms, you like the way I tell a story and you find some value in my opinions and input. Today, I am going to report to you information that is factual, information that I have found online and from trusted sources. But as with any other story I cover, you're getting a little bit of me with it. This is what I do here, and it ain't gonna change. I am not a journalist. I am not a reporter. I am a storyteller. So get on board the Dark Hearts train where we do moderation, we do facts, we do equality, we do common sense, and we do compassion, or die mad about it. That's freedom, when we all have the ability to make our own choices, no matter what those choices may be, so long as those choices do not hurt another person. Still here? You're my people, and I love and appreciate every single one of you. Just days ago, one of the most fascinating and intriguing stories broke in the national news when journalist Joshua Kaplan published an article in ProPublica. Joshua was contacted by a man, a gay man from here in Utah, and yes, the gay part does matter, who has done the unthinkable. This man is remaining anonymous for very good reasons. In fact, his life is very much in danger, and sadly, I believe Joshua Kaplan's life may be as well. The anonymous man known in the article that we will be talking about today is calling himself John Williams. What did John do? John infiltrated the largest militias in America and has spent the last 4 years pretending to be an extremist right-wing compatriot, preparing to go to war either against the United States government or against its people. The moment I heard this story break, I sat down and devoured everything I could get my hands on. And when I tell you this is one of the most daring, brazen, and dangerous acts that I have ever seen, I mean that. This man was so successful that he became the militia's top commander for the state of Utah. And for Utah, that is saying something. A very large portion of this national story takes place right here in Southern Utah, and I have some insights to offer as well as some additional stories that others do not. This shocking national story has caused quite a stir here in Southern Utah, and I am confident in saying that I fear this is only the beginning. This is the story of the militia and the mole. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's begin. John Williams is sitting at home when news of the insurrection breaks nationwide. As most of us were, John was sickened by the grotesque display of anti-patriotism and disrespect for the country that we all call home. Unlike most of us, John decided to do something about it. He didn't write a letter. He didn't go on Facebook and start calling people names. He didn't rant to his friends and family. John made a decision he told no one about. John was going to infiltrate a right-wing extremist militia. First, you need to know a little about John. John grew up in a dysfunctional and unhappy home. He has the court records to prove it. He was a gay child living in Mormon-dominated Utah. His father told him that homosexuality is a mortal sin, and John was painfully aware that he was unwanted, unloved, and unsupported. He began spending most of his time outside. He liked to go bird watching. He would camp by himself, anything he could do to be out of the house. When he was old enough to move out, John decided to start living off the grid for several weeks at a time. He would take jobs at delis and grocery stores from time to time, but he hated them. He wanted to live outdoors, but without income, he fell into petty crime, stealing things he needed, and sleeping where he wasn't wanted. John was once arrested for criminal mischief, and his response to that arrest was unhinged. He sent dark and disturbing emails anonymously to the police working his case, and he even threatened their families. The emails were traced back to John, and he was put in prison for 3 years for making these threats. While John was in prison, he began to read. A lot. He loved natural history books, but he'd read about anything he could get his hands on. Surviving in prison changed John for the better. This does happen. John realized that surviving in prison wasn't much different than surviving off the land. He learned how to avoid gang leaders and how to work with corrections officers. John realized that he had a natural ability to make things work, and he decided that when he got out of prison, he would become a wilderness survival instructor. When John was released, he began to advertise his services on Facebook. Now, remember, this is here in Utah. Some of the wealthiest people I know own guided hunting companies. They take hunters and weekend warriors out into the country during hunting season to give them a better chance at being successful. There are lots and lots of hiking guide services here as well. It's a really big business. And then, of course, we have too many wilderness therapy programs to count. There's less now than there once was because so many have been involved in scandal, but they're still here. A wilderness camp is when kids that are getting into trouble at home are taken into the wilderness. They're actually taken from their homes in what's called a snatch and grab, and then they're transported while blindfolded into the wilderness. If you've been here for a long time, you've seen my friend Travis on the channel talking about his years as a transporter for a large wilderness program here in southern Utah. The outdoor industry here in Utah makes millions and millions a year, and John Williams thought, why can't I get some of that? Joshua Kaplan describes a photo of John Williams, and he says, quote, an old photo captures Williams looking like a lanky camp counselor as he shows students an edible plant. He sports a thick ponytail and cargo pants, painted toenails poking out from his hiking sandals. But before you start thinking that John Williams is a tree-hugging hippie, you should know this. John liked to fist fight. He got very involved in Krav Maga and Muay Thai, and he enjoyed those practices very much. One year for his birthday, John took nothing but a knife into the wilderness and lived for 40 days on chipmunks and currants. This is not some princess. John's business didn't take off the way he'd hoped. He didn't get hired as much as he wanted, and money got tight. And then in December of 2019, John got an email from a leader in the militia called American Patriots 3%. It's an anti-government, far-right-wing militia. This man told John he could pay him $1,000 for a wilderness survival training session with several militia members involved. John took the job. He made the men agree there would be no semi-automatic rifles, just handguns. Close to a dozen militia members showed up to train near Peter Sinks, Utah. It's cold in Peter Sinks. Utah is a place of very extreme climates. It gets 120 degrees in the summer here where I live, and it's bitterly cold just hours north of me. The men told John that they wanted training in evasion and escape, but John informed them they weren't ready for that. So for 3 days, he trained the men on the basics of wilderness survival with an emphasis on surviving while staying hidden. He taught the men how to build a shelter to keep dry. He taught them how to make a fire and how to clean it up so no one would ever know they were there. This just makes my queer-loving little heart sing. I chuckle at the thought of these so-called manly men out in the Utah mountains learning how to be a man from a gay man that they most likely have hatred for. It's such a good lesson in stereotypes and an even better lesson and reminder that what you think of as a gay man is not always correct. I have spent 30 plus years as a gay rights and queer rights activist, and if you have a problem with that, kick rocks. As the days passed during this training, John became more and more put off by the men that he was teaching. One of them used a racial slur about Jewish people. They were very condescending, and they spoke very rudely about the majority of Americans. And by the end of the session, John was really done with these men. At the end of the training session, the leader handed out patches to other militia members, and John said that reminded him very much of the biker gangs in prison. And by the end of the training session, John had decided he would never work with a militia again. Now, in the survivalist community, training militias is taboo. It is highly frowned upon. True outdoors people do not like these types of people, and they don't want them benefiting from the skills of a true wilderness expert. John needed the money badly, and he was embarrassed that he had taken the job, so he didn't tell anyone. And then came January 6th. As John sat home watching the violence, he was angry to see one of the same AP3 patches that he had seen during the training session, and he began to feel guilty. He had enabled some of these men, and now they were committing an act of terrorism at the United States Capitol. John's anger grew, and he knew he had to do something about it. John Williams stands in front of his mirror, practicing his mannerisms and reciting his new self-given name, Dave. John had filled out the paperwork and had become an official member of the AP3, American Patriot 3%. He said joining the group was easy. They take anybody. John had honed his skills of deceit in prison, and they were now serving him well. He wrote down every lie he told about himself so he could keep track of them. Absolutely no one knew what John was doing. He began studying cult leaders to learn how they manipulate people. Keith Rainier was especially impressive to John. This man could make people believe whatever he wanted, do whatever he wanted. And John learned an important lesson from studying Keith Rainier. Using cruelty wears people down. John began employing that tactic with the other members of the militia. He berated others online and spoke down to them, telling them that their security was weak and that they were all incompetent when it came to technology. He said that left-wing hackers could easily hack the militia sites, and unless the militia stepped up their game, they'd be discovered. People began to really respect John Williams as Dave. One day, John got a message from Orion Rollins, who is Utah's top-ranking militia leader. Rollins said to John, "Don't worry about being a dick. It's time to learn and become as untraceable as possible." And then he thanked John for his wisdom and guidance. This just makes me giggle. After January 6th, militia membership plummeted because insurrectionists were being arrested and jailed, and Orion Rollins was feeling the sting of losing so many members. His focus was on saving the militia, not on taking up arms to fight the government anymore. On March 4th, 2021, John got a message from Rollins complaining that everyone was still ignoring his advice. So John offered to take over as the state intel officer for Utah. Orion Rollins replied, "My hands are tied. If I'm not able to take charge, the whole militia might unravel." So John Williams took over and was now at the top. John knew that this promotion meant he was now safer. As leader, he would be the ones others would come to if they suspected a mole. He'd also now have access to more information. As leader of the militia, John began attending paramilitary trainings. The members shot semi-automatic guns. They practiced ambushes with homemade explosives. John kept a list of names, everyone he met in the militia, and was disappointed to find out that an Air Force Reserve Master Sergeant was in the militia here in Utah and actively recruiting other military men to join. Men who are in the military shouldn't be in an anti-government militia. What's that about not being able to serve two masters? There was something else. John was involved in attending rallies, and this is where I'm going to stop for a moment. A little personal story that no one else is going to be able to share with you on this subject. 3 years ago, the television show We're Here came to my town of St. George, Utah. We're Here is a show produced by HBO where 3 very famous drag queens go into small rural towns and help queer people who want to get started in the world of drag. You can Google this entire event for more details. Just search We're Here, St. George, Utah, and it all comes up. What happened was hands down the most sickening, vile, and disgusting display of open bigotry against queer people that I have ever witnessed firsthand. We have a councilwoman here in St. George that is an absolute nut job. She's an embarrassment to the state of Utah. When our city council goes to Salt Lake City, to the state capitol for meetings, this woman always tries to grab her moment because she is thirsty. She is dying of thirst. And the leaders of the state literally turn and walk the other way when they see her. I've seen video of it. It's hilarious. Anyway, she and I started to go the rounds on social media. She was throwing a fit about this TV show with drag queens coming to St. George, Utah, and I wasn't having it. I invited her to have a sit down with the queer community, of which I am not a part. I am an activist and a friend of. I offered to have it catered for breakfast, like meetings that I've gone to in Austin and Vegas and bigger cities when I lived there. They would call it coffee with the council. Well, here in St. George, I offered to call it hot chocolate with the council because, Mormons don't drink coffee. For days and days, I promised this woman everything she asked for. Security personnel, the local media in attendance. I even got the police chief to state he would send a couple of officers to oversee the entire meeting, because we need security at a breakfast meeting. These lunatics that think queer people are such little snowflake pansies are also terrified of them. Like, pick a lane. Pick a lane, bigots. So this goes on for a few days, and then, of course, as I had everything set, she backed out. Because of course she did. What did I do? I posted our entire email thread on my social media because transparency and truth is more important than anything else in politics. Needless to say, this loon spent 6 months attacking me on her page, which I was blocked from illegally, I might add. But this is a Tuesday for me here in St. George. This woman is a fly on the bottom of my shoe. I've been doing this a long time, honey. I gave her the rope and she hung herself with it. So I went on doing what I do. And then days before the big drag show was to take place in our public park, HBO had gotten a permit for it. Everything was planned out. These famous drag queens were to perform with the amateur drag kings and queens. The city pulled the permit, and the city manager quit his job, stating that he would not be party to the lawsuit that HBO was going to rain down on the heads of the officials in St. George who broke their contract. Oh, I still get so riled up when thinking about this. It is a public park. It belongs to everyone. There are adult-rated drag shows and there are family-friendly drag shows. Not all drag is R-rated, just like all movies aren't R-rated, and this was to be a family-friendly drag show. The city manager, who got kind of pushed out of his job, he got a $750,000 settlement, and we love that for him. I can talk about this more another day if you want to hear more about it. But here's why I'm talking about all this. Oh, and by the way, our city now just settled a second lawsuit with Drag Stars of Southern Utah because they canceled a show for that group as well. So this lunatic city councilwoman of ours has now cost the city over $1 million. Were it not for her actions and her riling up some of the other council people who went along with it, and that's on them, the city manager never would have quit and they would never have had to pay him that huge settlement. Back to why I'm talking about this. At that drag show in the park with children and families running around were armed protesters, militia lunatics, and screaming Karens cordoned off to the side in a little cage where they belong. And I know for a fact that AP3 members were armed and in attendance at that show, and this is not the only time I have been in attendance where they were present. If you think these gravy seals are patriots worried about corruption in government and injustice, your family tree did not have enough branches. People who fight corruption and injustice spend time in libraries and meetings, but that's not sexy. They don't get to put on their little outfits and stand around with their metal dicks overcompensating and posing for the media. media. And before you think you know what I believe in, I own guns. I hate the BLM, I believe in public lands usage, and I believe in fiscal responsibility in government. I also have this crazy notion that queer people actually exist and that being a American means they have every single right that I have and can exist however they choose to exist. That to me is patriotism, and that to me is what being an American is about: freedom and equality and justice. I warned you at the beginning of the episode. You can't say I didn't warn you. I get very fired up when talking about this shit. And if you'd seen some of the things that I've seen over the many years that I've done this, sat with 14-year-old boys with broken arms and black eyes from their fathers in emergency rooms, I gotta take a deep breath. These are my people. You f with my people, you f with me. And I am not always such a nice person. So when I read this story, what was the first thing that went through my mind? Was John there? At the drag show, standing there as a gay man watching this disgusting display of hate and bigotry? I've been thinking about that ever since I read Joshua Kaplan's article. I doubt I will ever know. John Williams stayed undercover in this militia for years. Now, by this time, they all know who he is. We're going to get into that. About 2 years after joining the militia, John began contacting journalists to tell his story, and he was shocked when only one journalist replied to his emails. Joshua Kaplan, who is now being rightfully rewarded by having his name made famous. He's also most likely in danger for breaking the story. But to any militia people, I would like to remind you that Luigi might be locked up. I ain't saying it's right. I'm just saying it's true. Those of us who are actual patriots, who respect true freedom and honor free speech, who believe in the free rights of the media, we are a 10 times bigger army than you and every militia put together in this country. So keep that in mind. Because what we aren't going to do is harm members of the free press and call it democracy and freedom. Let me dispel any thoughts you have that there isn't an army of people who believe that. You're free to play your war games and practice for whatever it is that you believe you're practicing for. You're free to protest, and you are free to use your First Amendment right even when I disagree with you. I fully believe in that. Every single human being has the right to live their life as they so choose, as long as they do no harm to another human being. That last part. Keep that in mind. Okay, I gotta calm down. Joshua Kaplan listened to John Williams' calls and he read his emails, and he was overwhelmed at the detail that John had. And at first he wasn't sure what to make of it. John seemed obsessive. John wanted more done, and he knew he had to get the word out about what was happening in these militias. And then John Williams got a call from Orion Rollins again. Orion gave John a phone number and told him to call it. Who was he calling? Bobby Kinch. John Williams sits down with a recording device attached to his phone, and he calls Bobby Kinch. He doesn't know who Bobby is, and so he's surprised by the reaction he gets when Bobby yells out, "What's going on, man? How you doing?" Bobby must have sensed that John was confused, and so he said, "We met years ago." John was searching his memory and thought, Bobby must have been at that training in Utah years ago. Who is Bobby Kinch? He continues to John, and he says, "Well, I'm now the sitting current national director of the Oath Keepers." For my foreign viewers, the Oath Keepers are the most extreme of the extreme right-wing nationalist militias, and their leader, Stuart Rhodes, is sitting in jail for conspiring to overthrow the government on January 6th. When Stuart went to prison, Bobby Kinch took his place. Bobby is calling to tell John, the mole, that Orion Rollins, the leader of the Utah militia, has left AP3 and defected to the Oath Keepers, and Orion has been singing John's praises. Bobby wants John to help build a bridge between AP3 and the Oath Keepers. Let's talk about Bobby Kinch for a moment. He was a cop in Vegas for 23 years. His specialty? Being part of what was called the Black Squad in Vegas, a group of cops tasked with investigating violent crimes where the suspect was black. Yikes. Kinch crashed out and ruined his career by continually going on Facebook, ranting about a race war and talking about how white, how American, how Christian, and how straight he is. Do you know what my white American straight husband has never done? Talked about how white, American, and straight he is. Ever. Not once in 27 years have I ever heard my husband or my father or my son-in-laws or my brother-in-laws or my uncles or my grandparents, war veterans, many of them, talk about how American or straight or white they are. Not one time. Because straight men don't have to tell people how straight they are. Americans don't have to tell people how American they are. White people ain't got to tell other people how white they are. Bobby Kinch was labeled a threat to President Obama, and in 2016, he turned in his badge just before a Las Vegas Sun article broke on this story of the Black Squad and some of the people in it. Guess where Bobby Kinch lives now? Guess where he lives now? Here. I found his Facebook page, and it says he lives in Las Vegas, but I know for a fact he was working here at Sportsman's Warehouse after he was forced to turn in his badge. Let me tell you what the Oath Keepers are about so you understand my dismay. It disturbs me that these people are here in my community. It does, and it gets much worse as the story goes on. The leader of the Oath Keepers has been found guilty of seditious conspiracy, obstruction of official proceeding, tampering with evidence, among other charges. 3 additional leaders in the Oath Keepers are all felons: Kenneth Harrelson, Jessica Watkins, and Thomas Caldwell. The group is anti-government to the point that members have had standoffs with the police. They appear armed at demonstrations, brandishing weapons and threatening violence in the streets. They're anti-United Nations. They live in conspiracy theories. And according to one of their own, John Williams, the Mole, they regularly discuss committing acts of terrorism here in America. They want to round up immigrants using their guns to take people by force. They build bombs. I could go on and on. I am heated today. I really didn't think I was going to get this heated. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. Who am I talking to? It gets worse. Someone broke into the Utah Attorney General's office a couple of years ago, and for some reason, the Oath Keepers felt this was linked to them or affected them in some way. One of the leaders of the militia told John Williams about their concern involving this break-in, and John couldn't understand why the Oath Keepers cared about this, but this leader said something that really bothered John. One of the leaders in the Oath Keepers said to John, "The sheriff should have some answers to my inquiries about this break-in today or tomorrow." John thought to himself, why is the sheriff's office of Salt Lake County in communication with the Oath Keepers? This is something I would like to know as well. So John asks this leader, a man named David Coates, "I'm curious, Dave, how responsive is the sheriff to your inquiries, or do you have a source that you work with?" And David Coates responded, "The sheriff has become a personal friend who hosted my FBI interview. He opens a lot of doors." What now? The Salt Lake County Sheriff is Rosie Rivera, not a he, and she has been the sheriff since 2017. So this is obviously a man in her department, not the actual sheriff. John tried to get the man's name, the man in the sheriff's department, but David Coates seemed reluctant to give it, and John didn't want to push. John then goes and stays with Bobby Kinch at his house here in Utah in Duck Creek, which is apparently where he lives now. Duck Creek is a little town above Zion National Park. My grandfather built a cabin there with his own 2 hands, and it has turned into, a lot of people around here call it mini Vegas. The Utah people do not like all the Vegas people that have built cabins up at Duck Creek, and a lot of them are very extreme. So John goes and stays in this cabin with Bobby Kinch, and he brings with him a recording device. But as John is getting unpacked and opening his suitcases up, Bobby's dog comes and takes the security device out of his suitcase and starts chewing on it. Bobby later sees the dog chewing on the recording device, and he picks it up and he's like, "Oh, sorry about this. He's a puppy." And John was like, "No big deal, whatever." I guess your paramilitary training it's not really catching on. While John is in Bobby's house, he secretly takes photos on the walls of the house. Let's talk about those. One of them was like a hunting scene, and it had a quote on it that said, "There is no hunting like the hunting of man." It's totally normal. That's totally normal, you guys. It's a quote from a book. Don't you have that hanging on your wall? Another plaque on Bobby Kinch's wall in the cabin said, "Those who have hunted armed men long enough and liked it never really care for anything else." Totally normal. Nothing to see here. No big deal. As John is staying at Bobby's cabin in Duck Creek, the 2 of them go to attend a meeting for the Oath Keepers. Where? Oh, just in my hometown of Cedar City, Utah. No big deal. As they drive, Bobby turns to John and recites a Hemingway line that he calls his mantra. He says, "I have a harder time killing animals than a human being." Then Bobby tells John a fun little story. He says, "The night I decided to retire from the police force, you didn't retire, bud, you were forced out." He had woken up in an oleander bush with no memory of how he'd gotten there, and he had blood on his hands. Bobby Kinch tells John, "I black out when I get angry, and I don't remember what the I did. I had to literally take my magazine out of my gun and count my bullets to make sure I didn't kill somebody." Yep. Those are the people that we want as cops. Definitely. These are definitely the people that we want in militias that have tons and tons of guns. 100%. When Bobby and John get from Duck Creek to Cedar, Bobby introduces John to the other men. He says there was like 12 men there. Bobby says to them, "This is John. He's not the feds. And if he is, he's doing a damn good job." John Williams said he laughed a little too hard at Bobby's statement, but what happens next is not funny, not even a little bit. As the men sit in their Oath Keepers meeting, they talk about the fact that one of their leaders, Elmer Stewart Rhodes III, has been sentenced to 18 years in prison for his involvement in the insurrection. They talk about what candidates they're going to endorse, and they discuss what paramilitary training they're going to work on. At this meeting, John Williams reveals, is a doctor, a city prosecutor. I know these people. I'm 99.9% sure I know exactly who they're talking about. And there's also an ex-city council member there. And again, I'm sure I know who this is. And like I said, their lives are about to get very, very interesting and very different. And I love that for them. The men end the meeting by discussing how so many law enforcement officers here in southern Utah have been recruited to the militia. And one of the men says that he can get the sheriff on the phone any time of the day. Who is he talking about? The sheriff of Iron County. I see you. Bobby Kinch tells the other men, "The sheriff is my tie-in to the state attorney general because he's friends." Oh, we love this for you. We love this for you. Do you remember the story of Tim Ballard in his little undies, his little man panties, and how his scandal brought down the state attorney general, Sean Reyes? Well, Sean Reyes is the attorney general that they're talking about. So we've got the Iron County Sheriff involved. We've got the Attorney General of the state of Utah, former. He had to resign. I love it here. I love it here. I love the fact that I was born and raised in a Wild West pioneer sex cult that has, led to me living my life in this gorgeous, beautiful state with some wonderful people and also some batshit crazy people. John Williams then contacts a 19-year-old militia member who is tech savvy and convinces him that for experience, he wants him to build a portfolio on someone even higher than he is in AP3. John Williams tells this 19-year-old named Rowan that it is safest to practice on people they know, and he wants to see how good his tech skills are. This is genius. He's literally using a member of the militia to build a dossier on the group's leader by being one of the group's leaders. Rowan was eager to impress John Williams, but Rowan was also on probation. Why? Oh, no reason. He just walked up to a stranger's truck window while she was pulling out of her driveway, had her roll down her window like he needed to ask her something, and then punched her in the face several times for absolutely no reason. No big deal. And then when the cops came, Rowan started screaming that he was going to blow up the police department. Totally fine. Totally normal. That happens like every day. These are the kind of people that are in these militias. As Rowan goes to work building this dossier for John on an even higher up leader, the Salt Lake Tribune publishes an article about those trying to expose voter fraud, which included the name of an oath keeper. Rowan then tells John that this journalist, this Salt Lake City Tribune reporter, has been added to the red list. And he says that he has many doxes on journalists here in Utah. Doxing, if you're unaware, is sharing people's personal information, their address, their phone number, to the extent that it endangers their safety. I sent a text message to my contact at the Salt Lake Tribune and asked, "Is this you?" And he said, "No, I know who it is." And he told me the person's name. I'm not going to share it, but he says he knows for a fact that he is also on a list. Rowan sends this Tribune reporter's own dossier to him, telling the reporter, "We know where you live. We have your phone number." So this is a threat. This is a terroristic threat, and it makes John Williams very uncomfortable. He's starting to see some really ugly things at this point. By 2023, John wanted out. He wanted out of AP3. He wanted out of Oath Keepers. He had actually made up his mind that he wanted to infiltrate the Proud Boys, and even got David Coates to vouch for him in the local chapter of the Proud Boys. His next target, he says, is a notorious white supremacist group. John Williams had so much documented at this point in time that he knew it was time to release his story. He had developed insomnia. He was having trouble eating. He went to a militia rally after the Kyle Rittenhouse incident, and when he got home, he vomited blood. This stuff had become increasingly terrifying for him. But still, he continued to work, and he looked for journalists to trust with his story. And I just want to take a moment and recognize what this man has done. At great personal sacrifice, these are not good guys. These are not patriots. They're lunatics. If they want to own their guns and practice shooting and do whatever they do out in the woods with each other, that's fine with me. I don't care. When you start threatening journalists, making threats against private citizens just because you don't agree with them, when you're building bombs and have all these wacky ideas and you're, joining up to overthrow the government, no, you're a terrorist. Oh, now I just remembered that this platform doesn't let you say that, so I'm going to bleep everything out. On March 20th, John Williams called Scott Seddon, who is the founder of AP3, again, that is American Patriots 3%, or one of the founders. Joshua Kaplan listened to the tape recording John made of this phone call, and he was impressed that despite John's mental state, he was able to continue to perform so well in his role. By the end of that phone call, Scott Seddon had agreed to fire the head of AP3 in Utah and install John as its leader. This is the phone call where John gets confirmation that the Iron County Sheriff is the militia's link to law enforcement and the Attorney General's office. You can Google who the sheriff is. The Iron County Sheriff told Joshua Kaplan that he is not an official member of the Oath Keepers, but that he knows a lot of them and he thinks they're really good people. What's the lyric? Some of those that burn crosses. Then John finds out a woman in a militia Zoom seminar is telling members, all 5 or 6 of them, that the vice mayor in Virginia in her area was being harassed for a homophobic remark, and that the reporter who named this vice mayor was part of the deep state. This woman in the Zoom meeting told other militia members, I have to settle the score with this guy. She's referring to the reporter who did this story about a homophobic vice mayor in Virginia. So John privately contacted this woman in the militia and tried to talk her down from taking matters into her own hands and inciting violence, but she wasn't budging. The woman acted annoyed that John was seemingly not on her side. So John was very worried, and he sent an anonymous warning to the reporter in Virginia, letting him know that a severely mentally ill woman who is heavily armed, had made threats against him. The reporter published an article stating what John had told him. Now, of course, John didn't use his name, but there were only a few people in that Zoom meeting. And when that article came out, John knew his cover had been blown. He was the only one who had contacted that woman, telling her, calm down, this isn't the way to handle things. And he knew after that Zoom meeting, they're going to know who I am. John pulled his go bag from his closet and fled. He disappeared, knowing that it was all over with. And as he did, he felt a giant sense of relief. Joshua Kaplan, the journalist, and John Williams finally meet face to face. They spent days talking at a Best Western motel. John told Joshua that when he vanished, he dropped everything he owned and went underground. He threw his phone in a river, he flushed documents down the toilet, and then he spent several weeks in the desert. He was ready for an attack, but it never came, and he began to self-reflect. John told Joshua, I don't necessarily like what it says about me that I have a talent for this. John also told Joshua that he expects extremists will murder him when this story is released. John told Joshua, Until they kill me, this is what I'm doing. He wants to inspire others to get involved and even plans on starting his own vigilante collective of like-minded people. When this story was released just days ago, it enraged the militia members and sparked a wave of paranoia. And that is exactly what John wants. He wants militia members to think every time they make a phone call or go to a meeting, another John might be sitting right next to them. He wants them scared. And John still has thousands and thousands of documents that he plans on releasing. John also says something to Joshua. I'm going to bleep one of these words out. John said, I want them to know a faggot is doing this to them. You go, John. I want to give absolutely all of the credit for this story to John Williams and to Joshua Kaplan. Everything I have reported to you today, aside from my own stories, has come directly from the ProPublica article. And I'm going to post a photo right here so you can see what the headline looks like. And I will also post a link to the article in the comments of the videos. I'm merely repeating the story. Monsters come in many shapes and forms. We don't have to agree politically. Having differing political views does not a monster make. But bloodthirsty cops, terrorists parading as patriots, government officials who assist them, and those that seek to undermine our democracy, they might not be the serial killers we discuss so often here in the true crime community, but they are monsters just the same. Oh, I can't wait for the comment section on this one. You can see how much I care, because every time I do a controversial episode, everybody's like, you need to stick to this. You need to do this. No, I'm going to do what I want. Thank you for joining me today on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you have not. It helps a lot. I want to say a special thank you to my patrons. I really appreciate your support, and you are getting bonus content this week. You know, I've got 2 podcasts I got to blab about. This one is called Dining with Death. This is an archival series. I do not make new episodes, but there are some great stories in it. This is the current podcast, Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. I post brand new episodes every Monday and every Wednesday, and you will hear stories there that you will not hear on YouTube. Both podcasts are on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon. Our community is involved in a perpetual fundraiser. Watch this short little video on my channel, and it will tell you all the ways you can donate a few bucks to help us donate to police departments that have cold case DNA in storage that has never been tested. We are trying to help solve some cold cases, and we are trying to get criminals' DNA in the system. I love and appreciate every single one of you. Some of you have been with me for years, and you are my family. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other, and I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.